All right, thank you, everyone. And thank you to the Information Coalition for putting on this great conference. It's an honor to speak here about something that I truly am passionate about, which is change, change management, change leadership, and how we handle change in our organizations. The difference between change management and change leadership, and how we just deal with it with information governance. I am Dee Madrid, and I have a background a little diverse in technology, business, and information management. I am also the Information Body of Knowledge Chair for the Information Coalition's Advisory Board. As you heard Nick say yesterday, we are trying to put together a information body of knowledge that is open source, taking advice and recommendations from practitioners in the profession and varying degrees of the profession of information management. So if you are interested in volunteering and helping us with that, please find me around the conference. You can find me by the table. Pick up a card that's at the table, or I can give you a card as well with the information on how to volunteer. There is also a section in the app that you can volunteer using as well. So enough of the promotional. Let's get started with change. Let's start with just defining it so we can get a good starting place with it. According to the Oxford Dictionary, change is an act or process through which something becomes different. It's a transformation, it's a transition. And information governance cannot be implemented or sustained without some level of change at the organizational level. It's changing how we think and work with information from the C-level all the way down to all the employees. It's an evolution for our organizations as well as for ourselves. Because technology is progressing and pushing us, always challenging us where it comes to governing and managing our organization's information assets. It's cloud, it's blockchain, it's Office 365, and the list continues to grow and change at such a rapid pace. And it's about adapting to where our clients work and not imposing extra work on them just so that we get information governance. It's meeting in the middle and finding ways to change the organizational culture as well as ours. So how do we accomplish this? Is it through change management? Is it through change leadership? Or is it using another technique altogether? So first up, change management. What is it? I think we're mostly familiar with it. And how well does it work? So this definition I found on the ProSci, who are as a consulting group. I think it's a very good definition, even though it's a little bit textbook-y. It's the process and tools that manage the transition and the people who are adapting to that transition. So how effective is change management? Well, according to the Information Coalition, less than 25% of companies say they have someone dedicated to change management. And confidence in change management overall is incredibly low. Why is that? It's because change is not always successful, and if it is successful, it's not sustainable. Which brings us to, why do change initiatives fail? They fail mainly because it's an outside-in approach, not a change that comes from within the organization. As change managers, we consistently push out the change to the people in the organizations. Now, a couple of examples of this are, moving away from shared drives to SharePoint, or forcing the use of metadata within ECMs or within SharePoint. These examples are the pushing the change out to the employees. And most people will naturally push back when with this authoritative style of approach. Their resistance then inhibits any forward momentum or progress that can be made, and it eventually becomes a cycle of action and reaction. And change management primarily is project-focused, it's goal-oriented, it's structured and analytical, which is great. We need that. However, fundamentally, it's about managing its tools, its process, its techniques, its structure. It's a one-size-fits-most approach. And it has certain assumptions. So here are a few of the assumptions that of a change management approach. That change itself can be managed, and that we as change managers are actually objective about the changes that we are implementing. That somehow we are not invested or passionate about the changes we are pushing for our organizations. There is also an assumption that change can be mapped, that it's actually a linear progression from beginning to end. And sometimes the focus just becomes the change itself. Now, I know I'm making change management sound bad. It's not. It's a tool that can be used effectively in the right situations. So here are the strengths and challenges of using a change management approach. Strengths. Change management helps orchestrate the change and ensures that the change happens at the right pace. It minimizes disruptions. It is planned, structured, and is a wonderful tool to manage the change related to a project. However, it does tend to overlook the people side of the change. It can be too focused. It can be authoritative. It, once again, pushes out, and people push back and resist. Why do people resist? Well, change threatens our sense of safety and stability, specifically employees who are comfortable with their skill sets, their knowledge, and the processes related to their day-to-day jobs. And they will feel threatened when change disrupts that. Another reason is fear. Fear of failure, fear of the unfamiliar. And these add to our unwillingness to change. And I say our because we all react to change, both at work and in our lives. I also would like to point out that not only do individuals resist change, but so do organizations as a whole. At its core, information governance changes how an organization manages their information assets. This may not always directly affect all employees, but it does affect how departments handle their work. It affects IT, legal, risk, and compliance, just to name a few. Still, we are asking an entire organization to change how they think about and handle their information. It's unsettling for individuals as well as organization. Change can disrupt the equilibrium of the company's culture, and that's the unifying force for the organization. Change needs to be addressed not only at the individual level, the employee level, but also the organizational and departmental. And that's hard to do when you are narrowly focused on a project-by-project basis using change management. That project focus to implementing change can also lead to change fatigue. This is very much like the story of Sisyphus. How many of you are familiar with the story? So I'll give a Reader's Digest version of it. The story comes from Greek mythology. It's about a conniving and unethical king who was so arrogant that he thought he could take on the gods. Well, that usually angers them, and you usually get a very stiff punishment with that. And his was to roll this huge boulder up this very steep hill for all eternity, just to have it come back down on him as he got to the top of the hill, and he'd have to start all over again, rolling that boulder up that hill and having it come back down on him, rolling it back up. And I think this is some way in some ways, how individuals within organizations start to feel about change with all the different projects that are being thrown at them. They get frustrated with the continuous change that is being asked of them, and it adds to the reluctance and resistance. And that brings us to change leadership. What is it, and how is it different from change management? Change leadership is the softer side of change. It's the people side, because initiatives will fail without any buy-in. It's influential, it's visionary, it's driving. It's a different mindset than change management approach. Change management integrates change into the status quo and asks people to adapt. It gets people to do things, perform tasks, and take actions. Change leadership empowers people to change, to create change, and create a new normal. Management, in general, focuses on problem solving, structure, tasks, and outcomes, as we just discussed. Leadership focuses on conditions for success, relationships, and inspiring trust. Managers ask for commitment, while leaders ask for engagement. Management controls outcomes, while leadership asks people to lean into the experience needed for sustainable change within an organization. So the difference between change management and change leadership can be summarized as follows. Change management is about being efficient, while change leadership is about being effective. Change leadership harnesses the energy, the power of people, the driving forces, visions, and processes that fuel large-scale and sustainable transformation. It is a transformation which is also defined as a thorough or dramatic change in the form or appearance. It's basically change on steroids. And how does change leadership work? Instead of pushing the change out, change leadership is more collaborative, it is participative, it brings people along on the journey and empowers them by including them in the process. This in turn engages and inspires them. Overall, it's a big picture vision, it's dynamic, it's creative, it's a process that transforms or revises an organization's business model. The strengths and challenges of change leadership come from this. You get buy-in, it's large scale, it's organization-wide. However, its execution can be limited due to the lack of control that brings on extra risk. There is a potential for discussing the change and actually not implementing. There's a sense of urgency, but the change may not always materialize. In other words, it can be a bit unpredictable. Due to the larger scale and the higher involvement, change leadership has less control of making sure change happens in the way you intended it, which is in an orderly fashion and in the time you would like it to happen. John Cotter, author of Leading Change, describes it as having a 1,000 horsepower engine. He goes on to state that you should have a highly skilled driver and one heck of a car in order to minimize the risks. While that isn't always possible or even a guarantee of success. Fundamentally, change leadership is about making large leaps. It's transforming an organization. It has a higher risk than change management does. It's culture change. And as we all know, that's extremely hard to accomplish. So, I've covered what change is, what change management is, and what change leadership is. So where do we go from here? Well, I believe we need to change our approach to change. The Roman poet Ovid stated that everything changes. Before him, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus stated, all entities move and nothing remains still. Buddhism has a central tenet of impermanence. Change is constant, and that includes those of us who are driving that change. I believe it's time we need to change our approach. So let's start with a new definition. So this is my attempt at defining this hybrid approach. It is the ability to communicate, influence, motivate, and manage change through the combination of processes and people. It is advocating for transformational or cultural change while supporting change through an iterative process. I'm not sure what to call it at this time. I haven't found a word that adequately expresses or conveys this hybrid approach. So I'm open to suggestions, and this is also an area I'm planning on exploring a little further for the information body of knowledge. So here are a few of my initial thoughts regarding this middle road. We have to merge the two worlds of change because one is too high level and the other is too focused. Different situations will call for different approaches. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to be efficient and effective in order to implement sustainable change. We need to have an overarching vision of the change without losing the details on how to execute on that change. It's being holistic with a plan and finding the middle road. It's long-term and short-term planning with a lot of flexibility added in. Ultimately, I believe it is a program management approach that treats information governance as a whole program, not a series of information-related projects. And that brings me to, how does this all relate to information governance? It all starts with defining the larger vision of change and why it is necessary. Then it needs to turn to that program approach I just described, of planning out the many projects that will make change a reality. It's engaging the people within our organizations and communicating the what and the why. And most importantly, it is asking for the opinions and the feedback, on how to best implement these changes. If it isn't a joint venture, the change will not be sustainable. If we are asking others to change and adapt, why shouldn't we? It may mean the difference between a successful implementation and a failure. We can't let a single-minded focus get in the way of success. We need to adapt to our environments while we ask the organization to adapt to a new way of managing their information assets. In my experience, I find adapting the implementation of a policy or initiative to where the organization is at versus where they should be brings us closer to your goal than dictating the full-scale change. Let me use an example of an email management policy that I implemented at an organization that I used to work for. I had executive support. Actually, I had a directive from my executive to implement email management policy for the organization that did not have any kind of policy whatsoever. They didn't have any size limit to the inbox. They did not have any automatic deletion after a certain amount of time. So basically, they were keeping everything forever. So I started by drafting a best practices level policy and then brought together the stakeholders to discuss my vision with them. It didn't go well. I got a great deal of pushback from IT. Why? Because I did not consult with them up front, specifically about the configuration of the Exchange server and other details about the email system. I also realized that I was asking the organization to make too large of a change from the culture of keep everything forever. So I went back to my computer and started over with an iterative approach. This time, I took the feedback and found a way to implement a policy that started the organization down the path of change that would not cause culture shock and resistance. So after consulting with the users, with IT and legal and other stakeholders, I was able to find a compromise that met my need of having information management without being too burdensome on the employees in the organization. I mapped out the steps, which is the project focus end of things, consulted with the stakeholders to get buy-in so the change could move forward with the policy with a larger plan of eventually getting to the best practices. And that is why collaborating with the business is so important. We need to collaborate with the people who do the work on a daily basis. They are the experts on their business processes and information assets. If they feel that their perspective is being taken into account, there's a greater chance that they will buy into the vision and implement that change. Now, granted, taking this approach will add a great deal of time to the entire process. However, this inclusivity will help with implementing and sustaining the change. So back to the implementation of the email management policy. One of my biggest detractors was the the person who had managed the Exchange server. Once I started working with him and taking many of his suggestions, he became more engaged in the process and eventually became one of my best advocates for the policy of change that I was implementing. So starting the process over and including the stakeholders definitely added time, but I believe it was time well spent. It was a difference between pushing that change out by saying, you must do this, versus driving the change by saying, I need your help and experience to make our organization better and more efficient in handling our information assets. So in summary, in order to generate sustainable change in our organizations and our profession, we need to combine our leadership and management skills. We need to instill a vision of where we are going and have a sound plan on how we are going to get there. It's being able to execute on transforming the organization, but being able to adapt while we're on that journey. As leaders, we need to appeal to the emotional side as well as the rational side of the organization's employees while establishing a collaborative effort and engagement. As managers, we need to have a solid plan with the tools and techniques to help execute that plan that we as leaders envisioned. By instilling an inspiring vision and introducing good operational processes, we can actually transform an organization's culture. So some final thoughts. Change is hard, both on an individual and an organizational level. It will always be a challenge. However, it is what we choose to focus on, either fighting those who want to hold on to their ways or engaging them to build a new way of managing our information assets. We need to change how we approach change by making it inclusive. But we can't lose sight of the overall vision, and we also need to keep an eye on the details. It's a delicate balance. Both change management and change leadership that will guide us to successful information governance. Thank you.